ME/CFS is actually the most underfunded disease for disease burden. So there's been research done of like quality of life of ME/CFS patients, and it's the lowest of all the conditions. It's like, it's worse than cancer, but it's extremely underfunded research into it. It's really shocking when you think about how many people are affected. I had this happen in 2009. I'd been sick for 4 years at the time and had gotten nearly bedbound. I was spending 23 hours in bed and couldn't think at all. I had like chronic pain in my body constantly and was just exhausted. And then I took antibiotics for H. pylori infection. And 2 days later, I woke up and all of my symptoms were gone. And it was the wildest experience of my life. So fast forward to 2022, and I was on Twitter and ended up finding out that remissions from antibiotics had happened to other people who had ME/CFS. So that's when we decided to try to recreate these remission events on purpose.
We get the, transient remission events. So the remission events are a series of all the symptoms that are related to ME/CFS, right? And it's just such an incredible feeling because you realize at that moment, wow, my body can feel normal, right? And it's really keeps you going. And then we both got significant baseline increases that lasted for, many, many months. So
I always imagined when we started the Remission Biome Project of having millions of people around the world who are bedbound sort of have the switch flip and be able to experience what we did of, realizing or experiencing that you can go back to what it feels like to be healthy, and just imagining millions of people, getting out of their beds and being able to live their lives again.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
So I find what you are doing very exciting, patient-led research. And to start, could you please briefly introduce yourself? We'll go
ahead, Isabel.
Yes, thank you. So I am Isabel Ramirez-Burnett. I am an engineer by training who wanted to be a doctor and was not able to do so because of my ME/CFS. However, I have always had a deep passion and love for science, and was fortunate enough to be able to, after graduating, work in the pharmaceutical sector for many years, with the highs and lows that the condition, presents. I have had ME/CFS since the age of 7. And through looking at studies and reading the literature and, trying everything under the sun, I decided at some point to become a health coach to better understand other aspects of things that could help me, like lifestyle choices. And after many years of that, decided to become a board certified health coach in order to help other people, at the intersection of science and lifestyle, right? So that is, kind of the history of how I came to this place. In 2021, I met Tess online on Instagram. She reached out because I was posting about how I was managing my EDS with Ancestral Health Principles. And she was on the board of the Ancestral Health Society, putting a symposium every year. So she asked me to present a poster, and we've become inseparable since then. After that, Tess was looking at patients online who had anecdotes of having remissions with antibiotics, which she had herself. And one day she asked me, this was 2022, if I ever heard of that. And I told her I have had, many experiences of that happening to me, but always dismissed it because there isn't anything, out there that explains it, right? So she was already starting the process of putting together a pilot study to try to recreate the remissions and see, what testing the hypotheses. So I became involved from the very beginning. Long story short, we now have an organization that's called Renegade Research that's looking to do research, clinical education, and practical advocacy. I'm the CEO of Renegade Research, and I am the project director for Remission Biome.
All right. And yeah, I'm Tess. My professional background is in aerospace engineering, and I have a PhD in Earth and Planetary Science and studied escape of atmospheres from Mars and Venus for most of my academic career. But I've been sick for 19 years now with ME/CFS, which we can tell you more about later, but complex chronic condition, which derailed my career in academia, but has brought me to a place that I'm very excited about. I wouldn't be doing anything else than what I'm doing now. So kind of, use my background in research and science, and then combine that with my lived experience as a patient to do what we're doing now, which I'll tell you more about.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I know that recently Renegade Research obtained an official nonprofit status. Did you have any experience of running nonprofits before that?
Yeah, so Isabel in her intro mentioned the Ancestral Health Symposium. So this is another nonprofit, and it's something that I was involved in for over a decade. I first got involved in 2011 at their very first symposium, and then very quickly got more involved and joined their board in 2014. And became very involved in that. And I'm actually the president of that organization too. And Isabel is on her board. She's the secretary. So some experience, but that's a much smaller organization and problem than what we're doing now for Renegade Research. You want to add to that, Isabel?
I didn't have much experience other than the short time with Ancestral Health, and prior to that, involvement with farming communities and nonprofits in that end, but not to the extent of the work that we're doing now.
And Remission Biome is one of the projects under the umbrella of Renegade Research. How did this project happen? How did it appear in the very first place?
Yeah, so the original spark for Remission Biome was these remission events that Isabel mentioned. And I had this happen in 2009. I'd been sick for 4 years at the time and had gotten nearly bedbound. I was spending 23 hours in bed and couldn't think at all. I had like chronic pain in my body constantly and was just exhausted. And then I took antibiotics for H. pylori infection. And 2 days later, I woke up and all of my symptoms were gone. And I just felt super energetic. I felt like my body was light and no pain. And it was the wildest experience of my life. So fast forward to 2022, and I was on Twitter and ended up finding out that this remission event remissions from antibiotics had happened to other people who had an ME/CFS. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow, like this isn't just me. This wasn't just a fluke. There might be something real to this. So that's when we decided to try to recreate these remission events on purpose, because, we had collected anecdotes, but it was like, if we can recreate these on purpose, then we can study them and try to understand, what's happening during them, which would tell us about the pathophysiology of the condition. If you can turn off symptoms with a switch, then we know that there's like not permanent damage, and that there's something, we can figure out how to permanently turn off that switch. That's that's the ultimate goal. And then Isabel, got involved, like she mentioned. Do you want to sort of tell your
Yeah.
perspective?
Yeah. So, like I said, I had the experiences, right? And after talking to Tess, I remember that when I was growing up, I used to get really serious throat infections, and I would look forward to getting them because when I got them, I would get a Rocephin injection, right? And I would have a remission event and feel great for weeks and sometimes even months. I was That was between the ages of 12 and 16. So I had no idea what was going on. All I knew is that I felt better after those injections than I felt normally, not just for the infection that it was treating, but in general, right? And I had several experiences with other antibiotics that were very similar throughout time, but then, and always was very curious about it, right, from a scientific perspective. But I kept telling myself that, it was just probably because the infection had made me feel so bad that, it just felt so much better after it was treated that I was, basically hallucinating about this. And then when I started reading the emerging science of the microbiome, even though I knew that antibiotics had such a positive effect on me, I started avoiding them because, the science at the time said it's not good for your microbiome without any further caveat. So then, again, fast forward to when Tess and I had that discussion. She was already on Twitter looking at the anecdotes. And when she first told me, I was in the process of buying a house and moving from another job and super stressed and like, okay, let's talk about this later. And, I may join you if you're still planning to do that. So then about a month later, when things had settled, we talked and I was like, okay, I'm ready to join. And we plan to, do the pilot together.
So how did the pilot look like? There were 3 people, I think, in the very, very first cohort.
Yeah, so that was in March of 2023. And what it looked like was sort of preparing our guts beforehand to get ready for the antibiotics. So it was, taking specific probiotics that wouldn't be killed by amoxiclav. And so that was for a few weeks beforehand. And during that time, doing some testing to get a baseline idea of, what was going on in our system. So testing like the microbiome, and I did single cell immune profiling, which, is only available to research. So it was really cool to be able to do that as a citizen scientist, and measured cytokines. And I actually bought my own centrifuge to do that. So I had never done anything like this before. My background was in aerospace engineering and space physics. And I was like, oh, yeah, I can just buy my own centrifuge and get a phlebotomist to stop by my house and process my own samples in the centrifuge and then send them on dry ice to Canada to get my cytokines measured. So it was a really fun experience. And so, yeah, it was that prep and all the testing for the baseline, and then taking the amoxiclav antibiotics and again, sort of like, doing testing during that period, tracking symptoms the whole time with an app called Bearable, and then doing the testing for months afterwards to see what happened. And I did. Isabel and I both had these remission events. We were able to purposely trigger them. So got samples taken during the remission events. And yeah, do you want to add to that, Isabel?
Yeah, and not only did we get the transient remission events, so the remission events are a series of all the symptoms that are related to ME/CFS, right? Like if you have, I don't know, a broken hip, that's not gonna help, right? That's not gonna happen. That's not gonna go away. But the symptoms related to ME/CFS does, and it's just such an incredible feeling because you realize at that moment, wow, my body can feel normal, right? And it's really, it fills you with hope, and it keeps going. It keeps you going. And then we both got significant baseline increases, that lasted for, many, many months. So what we are finding anecdotally, now we need to, study this formally, is that in many cases that baseline increase can be, reversed, or at least decline a little bit with subsequent infections. So something in the immune system continues to be triggered for that to happen. And even though the baseline increase is not a constant, complete remission, for me personally, I think for Tess as well, during that time, there were so many more good days than the bad days, right? So that scale tends to tip. And living through that and being able to feel so much better than you would otherwise, just it's a huge motivator to continue to look for answers.
Yeah. I always imagined when we started the Remission Biome Project of having millions of people around the world who are bedbound sort of have this switch flip and be able to experience what we did, of realizing or experiencing that you can go back to what it feels like to be healthy, and just imagining millions of people getting out of their beds and being able to live their lives again was extremely motivating. It's something that I still think about a lot.
Yeah, that's a brilliant image, and it looks like with your recent advancements, yeah, it comes slowly to fruition. So what is the current progress, like fast forward, current progress of Remission Biome? How does it go?
Go ahead.
It's going well. We're still undergoing, we're still in the midst of the project. We started with 50 participants, and what we've realized in this project, and I think that is a very huge constraint for research in general, is that we are not just looking at a single thing within the system, right? These are conditions that affect you systemically, that have many, many components. And perhaps is one of the reasons why, just targeting one therapeutic that targets one simple area, it hasn't been successful, right? So the issue with that immune dysfunction affects everything, metabolically, the microbiome, neurologically. So the constellation of symptoms that people experience are immense, but also the comorbidities or co-infections that are also present in the condition. So we know that, for example, if you have a depressed immune system, you're much more likely to have ill effects from mold, or to have chronic Lyme and things of that nature. So we took a step back to assess, how does all of this affect the efficacy and the ability to do what we need to do within the protocol and trigger this remission events, but even more importantly, the baseline increases that, people want to experience. Because at the end of the day, function is really what matters, right? We both have a constellation of symptoms that we still have, but on many levels, they are decoupled from the function. So I joke that I can, bulldoze through my pain and, still continue to do things, have meetings, work to a certain extent, right? When it's, for example, the neck pain, that triggers neurological symptoms that, make it much more difficult to do anything. But I digress. So what we realized is that we needed to work through the systemic obstacles that the participants have, and make sure that their system are primed, if you will, to go into the protocol. So there are no, for example, mold infections that can flourish even further when they take antibiotics, and things like that. So we expanded from a 3-phase protocol through a 6-phase protocol, where the first phase is very heavily testing, and it's much more of an individual approach. The second phase is a hold phase where nothing else is added or subtracted. And then the other 3 phases of the protocol kick in. And at the end, there's more time to balance that baseline even more and do more targeted, interventions that are, that are more, that are for the person who is, experiencing them. Yeah. So, and all of this also is done with the participants' providers. So participants have their providers working side by side with them on all of this.
Yeah, that just made me realize that can kind of mention, the way that we're doing the research. We're kind of breaking a lot of the rules of what people think of traditional research. So, Isabel mentioned kind of pivoting based on what we learned mid-study to change what we're doing. And so, a lot of people are like, you're supposed to set a design. You're supposed to stick to this in the beginning. You're supposed to, only measure one or only test one thing at a time and all these things. And so, we're doing it in a very different way. Where throughout the whole process, the participants are collecting a ton of data. So they use this app Bearable that I mentioned, where like multiple times a day, they'll go in and put in symptoms and put in exactly what interventions they're using. So like marking the times that they're taking their different supplements or doing interventions like yoga nidra or vagus stimulation. So, there's a lot that's happening. And then we're using our data analysis team is then pulling out information from the complex data set. So yeah, we're doing it a very different way. And then also we sort of think about, we're looking for clues for, what can be helping, what can be causing these remission events, with the idea that, we can also partner with academia, and what we learn can then be studied further in a more systematic way, in partnership with academia, or sort of sparking ideas for people to study themselves or do, more controlled clinical trials.
Yeah. And the data is already telling a story, right? Like we anticipate we'll be able to see, okay, responders have these things in common and non-responders have these things in common. What are the commonalities and differences from the different responses? But even, at this point, there's symptom clusterings and, that we're sharing with the public. Everything that we do is pretty much open source. So we're sharing with the wider community real time.
Yeah, and we're gonna make the data available for other people to analyze after we get everything set up.
I believe it's super important. And although you are, I would say, doing a non-traditional research, you are very professional, in how you approach the process. And you mentioned that the main goal of all these activities is to develop a protocol. So this protocol, how will it look like maybe in the end? Yeah. Do you plan to, I don't know, officially, get an official confirmation, with the research data that you collected, maybe from academia or whatever. So to actually, so now it's only like patient-led organization, and everyone can come and say, I have long COVID, I have ME CFS, and I want to try that. Can this protocol maybe in the future become widely available to all patients and be officially recommended by doctors in the hospitals?
So there's a complex answer to that. And the answer is not just this protocol, but perhaps, different protocols, because people have different presentations and different barriers, different symptomatology, different responses. And we need to really parse that out well in order for, things to work for the targeted population, right? But in regards to the remission biome protocol, like we said, we've iterated, we've refined it. And our medical director is actually going to have a public presentation. We're planning it sometime before the end of the year to educate clinicians on how to use the protocol with their patients, right? And we'll have all the literature available, and everything that we've done within the protocol. So then clinicians can use it and be able to have at least one tool to help their patients. We will also continue on to another cohort next year and be able to, do the protocol with the iterations we have already been able to do in this cohort, which we're hoping that it'll be streamlined even further. One big goal that we have is making it accessible to everyone. So with the funding that we have gotten, we have been able to provide financial support for people to get everything, the testing and the supplements that are, part of the protocol. The antibiotic is something that their provider prescribes, right? Because everybody's working within that partnership. So we want to make sure that, the products that are included are absolutely necessary. How can we source them that are, more affordable for everyone, and what equivalents may be available perhaps in other countries that people can have access to. The accessibility is a huge, huge piece for us, not just from a financial perspective, but from a geographical perspective and from a severity perspective. We could have, from the very beginning, excluded, the more severe patients, the more difficult patients, and get the milder ones and, talk about this outrageous success that we had with mild patients, right? But that's not the way to go, because that's not going to solve any issues for the greater population.
Yeah, we had over 500 people apply to be part of our first cohort. And we could have very easily chosen 50 people who would completely pay for the protocol themselves, who were mild. And we did purposely make that decision that we aren't going to leave anybody behind, and we're going to learn how to do this. Makes the process a lot harder for us, learning how to, do all the logistics and build for everybody. But it was a very conscious decision that we're going to do it this way.
Yeah, this is amazing. So, and what is the usual response from traditional, I would say, or orthodox science that you get?
So it's actually been very positive. I was surprised by this, but I think the professional people in this community, all the researchers and the clinicians, recognize how complex this condition is. And I think they all know we sort of have to take a non-traditional approach to really start to learn about this. And so early on, I started reaching out to academics and setting up meetings with them and telling them about these remission events and what we were up to. And people were really excited about it. They're very interested in the science, but also, wanted to support us as patients. And so we had a lot of academic advisors giving us ideas about the science and how we can move forward. And then clinicians too, which Isabel can sort of talk about how we've gotten clinicians involved. But I think I've heard from some clinicians that they're actually starting to recommend some of what we're doing to their patients, because we share a lot of information on Twitter too. And so, yeah, positive response, and people want to work with us.
Yeah, it has been overwhelmingly positive. And I think it speaks to the fact that what's broken is the system, right? It's not an individual problem. The professionals, researchers, and clinicians are working within the constraints of the system. And they are frustrated too, because they have gone years and years of, doing limited research and not having guidelines and not having therapeutics and not having real solutions for patients with this complexity. So I think that's why they are, for the most part, relieved to see that, we can push a way forward and show that we can do this differently and get, better and less expensive results, right? The expense of research that goes absolutely nowhere is just staggering. And then from the clinician's perspective, the experts clinicians who have reached out to us or we have reached out to have been incredibly gracious in sharing their time and expertise. And we've been able to put together roundtables and different webinars that are geared towards educating other clinicians and that patients can bring to their providers, to help them understand what these experts are doing that are, at least moving the needle a little bit.
Yeah, I just remember that the other piece of it is that we were surprised about the response from the participants' providers. So we kind of thought, oh, this is going to be hard. How do we get healthcare professionals on board with helping out with a study like this? Guiding the participant through and prescribing the antibiotics, and we're surprised with a lot of the response. I think, like Isabel mentioned, of there not being specific guidelines, providers feeling kind of frustrated because it is hard to deal with complex conditions like this. So I heard that a lot of them were like, okay, this is something that might help. So I'm gonna go with this. I want to help my patients, and this is a an interesting study, and I want to contribute. So it was really cool to see that too.
Yeah, that's so nice to hear that. Yeah, that people are actually people, even when they have to function inside the system, but they're ready to help. Yeah, and to join and to give their time and effort to help others. And I wonder, do you think that this flawed system is the reason why, although chronic fatigue syndrome is well known, I mean, it exists for probably decades. Yeah, maybe you definitely know better, yeah, than me. But is it a flawed system? The reason that we still, up to this moment, did not have any good guidelines how to treat it.
Yeah, the flawed system plus a lot of stigma about it. And you said that it's well known, but I found that it's not. People have sort of heard about chronic fatigue syndrome. Some people haven't even heard of it, but I think people don't really understand what it is and how serious it can be and how many symptoms it causes. It's not just fatigue. It's this multi-system complex illness. And like Isabel mentioned, it can cause immune problems, metabolic problems. And there's been, even though there's still so much more for us to learn and so much more research that has to be done, there's actually been a ton of research done showing biological abnormalities in ME/CFS. So a lot of patients like saying ME/CFS better. So it's myalgic encephalomyelitis. Because of the stigma behind the term chronic fatigue syndrome that people minimize.
Yeah, and it's not only that it gets minimized, it just doesn't effectively convey the depth of the fatigue, quote unquote, right? because it's not, everybody gets fatigued. You exercise and you're supposed to get fatigued after that. You have a long day of work and then come home and cook and take care of children. You're supposed to be fatigued for that. That is a normal response, right? But this is an abnormal response to the amount of effort that you're putting in. So depending on the severity level of the patient, right, you can have somebody who is not able to even go to the bathroom to brush their teeth because the crash that comes afterwards. And that is incredibly disproportionate, right, to what the activity is. And, for those of us that are on the milder side of the spectrum, if you will, it may be that you cannot attend an event on the same day that you work for a full day, or that you have to limit the number of meetings that you have in a day at work and things of that nature. But the difference is that very disproportionate response to the activity, and then the intensity of that response. So I don't just call it fatigue. It's just like you hit a wall that's invisible. Your battery just drained, and it does not matter how much you will yourself to try to do things. It just won't happen. And it's, not hypothetical, but there are hypotheses that it is your body's, protective mechanism, right, for whatever is going on internally, that is keeping you from being able to, to do things. Because a lot of people will tell you, well, if you're fatigued, just push through it. That doesn't work that way. Yeah. I have a ton of symptoms, right, that I can push through. Like I said earlier, if I'm, pain is one of them. But there is a shutting off of the system that happens in that state that is just not comparable to a regular level of fatigue.
Yeah. So kind of going back to your question then about the flawed system, I took it off talking about stigma because I think that sort of has influenced how ME/CFS has been perceived by the public and healthcare providers as a whole, and by research community and by funding agencies. And so ME/CFS is actually the most underfunded disease for disease burden. So there's been research done of like quality of life of ME/CFS patients, and it's the lowest of all the conditions. It's like, it's worse than cancer, but it's extremely underfunded research into it. And that's a huge problem. It's really shocking when you think about how many people are affected and how severe people can get and not have the support needed. And, Isabel mentioned that part of what we're doing is looking at accessibility for very, based on severity level. So a lot of the patients are housebound or bedbound, so they aren't even able to get into clinics to be able to participate in research studies. So, that's part of the system too, of like how research is done. And so I think decentralized studies are really important to understand these conditions, being able to have people participate from home. So like, part of a lot of what we do involves like at-home test kits. So that those people can participate in the research.
Yeah. And adding more to that conversation about stigma, part of it is the invisibility of the condition, right? Like you look at the two of us and you have no idea, what the pain levels are, what the fatigue levels are, how the neurological and, the cognitive difficulties are at the moment. And there are switches that seem to happen that can happen instantly, right? Like I can be seemingly okay, able to do many things, right? And then something, a switch seems to flip. And all of a sudden, I'm at that state where I've hit that wall. There is nothing that I can do. I cannot do another meeting. I just need to go and lay down. And there is no physical manifestation of that, right? So people do not understand how that even happens. And what ends up happening in many instances, especially people who don't have the family support or people who understand, is that the condition ends up being psychologized. And, patients are told that it's all in your head. Many patients get taken to psychiatric hospitals because of that. So I remember a story of one of the times that I've been at my worst. I was having cold sweats, fevers, like that energy was just not there. I was working at a bank at the time, and I remember, trying to go to work every day and I needed to stop like 5 times along the way, was always late because I just didn't have the energy. The sweats were pouring off of me. I was not even 30 yet, so I knew it wasn't menopause. So I finally was let go because my condition at work was just, it was obvious that I wasn't doing well, right? And then I remember about 3 weeks later going to my doctor, who had been my doctor for quite a while. And I walk in his office desperate. I'm crying. I'm telling him all of this. I'm telling him I am in so much pain. I cannot get out of bed. I cannot do anything. And this person who is not, he was not someone who was not compassionate. He had not dismissed me in the past. He was managing my prescriptions. The first thing that he goes to is, "You seem to be depressed," and does a depression questionnaire and prescribes, antidepressants, which later were the only thing that, in my life have given me suicidal ideation, right? So I keep saying I am an annoyingly optimistic person, and, I'm like annoyingly happy all the time. So the inability to recognize, right? And again, it's because of the system that, someone who is suffering this much and going through all of these symptoms, it's a natural response to be desperate, to cry, to just feel abandoned. And not saying that, the two cannot coexist. There are, many cases in which the two coexist, but taking the deviation from addressing the issues with the conditions, a lot of symptoms can be managed if they are, if they are properly studied and understood and tested and so forth. But we need to remove that stigma that's there, because that is the biggest barrier to getting appropriate care.
Yeah. You earlier you were saying that, talking about the fluctuation of this illness and how, right now nobody would know what you and I go through on a bad day, when we hit that wall. And related to the healthcare providers and the health system, that becomes important because they only see the patients on a good day, when you can actually get out of bed and you can get into the clinic and see the doctor. So, it speaks to the system as far as like the importance of telehealth, so that patients can actually, work with their healthcare provider from home. And so there's so many things that we can see as patients in the different systems that need to be fixed, that need to be changed, that people, unless you have the perspective that patients do, you're not going to really see the full picture. And so yeah, like the healthcare system, how research is done, and social support systems. A lot of times people are nearly bedbound and they still can't get disability. And it's a huge problem from both the stigma and not really understanding the full pathophysiology of the condition. It's like those systems too don't understand you can have dynamic disability, that that some days you could get a few hours of work done, but you couldn't hold a full-time job. And so patients can end up with no support, sometimes no family support, even in bed, barely able to get out to shower, and they're told that they should be working.
Yeah, definitely we need to work on improving the general awareness about what is it, so that this syndrome exists. So what are the symptoms, and that there are many people, how many people are suffering from ME/CFS.
Yeah, and it's gotten a little bit more attention because of the pandemic, right? Long COVID is a new infection-associated chronic illness like ME/CFS is. And about 60% of long COVID patients meet the criteria for ME/CFS. So, the same presentation pretty much. And, we're seeing a mass disabling event right in front of our eyes. And still, with all of that evidence, the progress is just not nearly enough to make a dent quick enough.
Yeah, so we're talking at least 100 million people around the world. And I think that's an underestimate. I think a ton of people are undiagnosed, don't even realize that they have ME/CFS or long COVID. And, I think it's 100 million, hundreds of million people, maybe a billion people around the world are dealing with these conditions to some extent.
Yeah, well, the New Nature article figures were 400 million, which is way ahead of the projections. And that's as of the end of 2023. That's for long COVID. But again, 60% of the long COVID patients meet the criteria for ME/CFS. And then we have other, viruses and bacteria that also trigger a like condition. So we're not dealing with the problem, fast enough, efficiently enough to match the level of the speed at which this is happening. Yeah.
100%. And do I understand correct that the protocols that you are developing, they are potentially suitable not only for long COVID or ME/CFS, but also potentially for other conditions that fit the profile?
Yeah, there are a lot of associated conditions.
Yeah. There's a lot of overlap, right, between the infection-associated conditions. We do need to test that more in other conditions. What we have, the remission biome cohort has long COVID and ME/CFS. But because of the overlapping presentations, the mechanisms, the systems, that are dysfunctional and other infection-associated chronic illnesses, the pieces of the puzzle in the science just fit, right? So I think that there's a lot of great work to be done and a lot of potential, with what we're doing to help a broader community.
Yeah, and I'd love to know more about your future research plans. I know that's because you have a lot. I watched your recent video and there was a lot. Tell me, please.
Yeah, we've been talking about remission biome for the past 50 minutes, but that's actually just a very small piece of what we're doing overall. So Isabel mentioned like our nonprofit is actually more than just research. We're looking at clinical care and accessibility and education, but kind of diving into the research side of it, we do have a lot of different projects in the pipeline. So we're sort of trying to take the remission biome model as a case study so that we can streamline future projects. And we have a lot of them looking at things like heart rate variability and drawing a blank now. What else? What else do we have in the pipeline, Isabel?
Glutamate, metabolism. Yeah. There are some, key components, right, within the system that we're trying to study separately, not in the way of traditional research, separately as it looking at one molecule or a group of molecule, but looking at one system, right? And then looking at that within the entire context of the condition and everything else that, that's a determinant within that. So we have a lot of those projects in the pipeline, but we also look at the organization as like a, three-legged stool, if you will. On one side is the research, and the goal with the research is to remain agile and be able to do, meaningful studies that can yield quick results that have the potential to improve patients' quality of lives, right? So whether it is a protocol that comes out of that, or it is, some guidelines as to how to speak with your provider if you're about to have surgery and the potential implications of anesthesia for the population, for example. The other leg of the stool is clinical education. So I mentioned that, we've done a lot of webinars and roundtables where we bring clinicians who are experts in the condition, which are very few, by the way, relative to the amount of people that it affects, to talk about their approach and the science to others. And we also have research education. So what is the emerging research? What are the hypotheses that are out there? And how can we bring those two together? And we're actually just started in the process of developing a platform with curriculum that is going to emphasize the biochemistry, right? So people can understand the complexity of it. And then on the other end, the other leg is more of what we call practical advocacy, right? So there's a lot of advocacy already that's about awareness. But where we want to fill the gap is in those social determinants of health type of advocacy, right? So if somebody loses their home, that is their first preoccupation. They can't even think about, getting proper medical care, right? And all the steps that go into that. They can't think about if they have mast cell activations and are, eating things that are triggering if they don't have the money to choose what they eat, right? So those are big factors. And then, like we said before, the people who are put into institutions because they, they don't have any that is physically visible, like we've seen people be denied feed tubes in hospitals, when they can physically not eat, right? So all of those things are critical first steps that people need to have in place in order to be able to even seek proper treatment. Yeah.
Yes, I believe that it's very challenging for patients actually in this condition, even to find enough energy to research and to dig into all of that. So especially when their issues are being ignored, or they are just told that, you are just inventing something, or maybe you are depressed. And I believe that your patient perspective is especially valuable especially because you are also scientists, because you have, I would say, you see both sides of a thing. I recently talked to a lady who does research in biotech, and she told me that, she's also quite critical towards the current system. And she said, the problem of research, especially in bio, is that researcher comes up with a solution. As an example, we will grow stem cells from the tissue taken from the patient, and in 5 years we will have everything, but the patient will die in 2 year period. So it makes absolutely no sense. And here you see the situation from both sides. Yeah, and you understand that actually, I would say more radical measures are needed to fix that, because people are suffering.
Yeah. Our organization is made up of about 40 patients and some caregivers, and very motivated. It's like we're going to figure this out. We aren't going to wait 5 years. We're going to do what we can now to push the research forward, but also Isabel keeps mentioning, figure out how we can help patients now to improve function. And that motivation plus the patient experience of these different systems really gives us a unique perspective of how we can do things differently and how we can make connections between the different researchers and clinicians and really push forward the areas that we see are important to work on. So a lot of our research projects start off as anecdotes from patients. And so, one patient will have an anecdote of something that worked for them or something that they noticed in their wearable data. And then we'll take that and we'll say, okay, let's design a study. Let's try to see if this is more than just an N=1. And try to push that forward and sort of bridge that gap between anecdotes and the sort of research that does take 5 years and millions of dollars. So we can sort of, give clues and guide the research in directions that we see, signal that there might be something interesting that we can study further.
Yeah, and those N=1s are very, very often incredibly informed, right? I have not seen another patient population that has become more scientifically literate, right, than this one. Patients use whatever, capacity they have. If I had $1 for every time a patient says, it was never in my plans to become a medical researcher, I would have a, gazillion in the bank, because it's the abandonment from the system, has led to patients having to, read journals, to, follow the few clinicians who are treating us, follow the researchers that are working in the space, and become incredibly informed, right, about the totality of the condition. So a lot of the patients, when they see, something, they understand where it's coming from and what that signal, can be. And it's an incredible asset, to research that needs to be leveraged.
Yeah.
100%. And actually, all these patients are now lucky that there is Renegade Research and Remission Biome, because they can join. So how patients who have long COVID, ME/CFS, chronic conditions associated with it, stay informed about your work, or maybe even join a future cohort?
Yeah. So the main website we use right now is remissionbiome.org. We're working on updating our Renegade Research website. So right now, the best place to go is remissionbiome.org. On that, you can sign up for our newsletter, which we'll send out information about these events we've been talking about. And on that, there is also a form to show interest in joining our cohorts, our future studies. And then there's also an application to become a volunteer on our website.
Yeah. And there's also information in there about our funding model. We are community supported, private donations, foundations. So if anyone, is able to donate, that information is also on our website.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation. And I wish you a good day.
Thank you. And thank you for
you.
taking an interest on this topic.
Thank you so much.